All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks again for taking time on a Wednesday afternoon to join us for the third episode of the Class of 2024 Study Abroad Info Sessions. As promised, we have been through a sizable chunk of content here together so far, including in week one of the series talking about eligibility, your application process and housing, following up with week two last week around the world with programs, and really digging in deep on the petition process. I hope that was helpful for some of you. And then the last thing we talked about was health, that we're going to be talking about today is going to be health and wellness, safety overall. So we'll give you some tips and pointers on where on the website and where out in the world to find advice on those two topics, as well as, this is my personal favorite, and I know that we nerd out about this in the office sometimes, but just like budgeting generally for study abroad. What does that entail and what are the tools that you have here on campus? So I wanted to ask, to start, by way of starting today's session, who knows something now that they didn't know 2 weeks ago? Yeah, pretty much everybody's like, I think so. Do you mind sharing what you know now?
I was just this is more like over the summer I was going to do a field school program for archaeology, and my plans of that have definitely changed through just, like mostly last week, just like being able to really have time to look through all the different options. I think we could do something different. So
okay. Yeah. So who else wants to share? What is something else you learned in this process so far?
I learned how the application process works, and I haven't know how it works. So
Okay. Great. Learning about the application process, learning about program models, thinking about what's the best fit for your goals. I don't know if that was it, or maybe just something about the program models for you like stood out and suddenly you thought, that sounds more like my thing. And that's great. So the other thing I kind of wanted to ask is anybody planning on, at this point, taking credit within their major on their study abroad program overseas? Just a show of hands. Okay. Is anybody thinking like, no, I just want to explore and take credit from something else entirely? Okay, maybe. And then there's like a mix as well too, right? In the between. So that is annoying. I'm probably just going to hold this and that'll be fine. I won't know exactly what to do with my hands, but the mic is being sensitive. So yeah, evolving plans, I think, is an important part of this, and to also remember that throughout this, you can reduce stress by just maintaining open lines of communication. That's with us, that's with your faculty back here, your advisors on campus, as things come up and change in your plans. So you're all familiar with this too, right? I don't know if anybody in the room is a neuroscience major, but there's this thing like neuroplasticity, right? And we've all been through it over the last 18 months since last spring, when your brain is forced to reckon with challenging situations and new processes. It goes through a period of growth, and you come out the other side feeling maybe a little bit different, maybe like you can handle more things. And that's part of the reason why we're digging in today on health, wellness, and safety. So a big topic was, what's it like in the survey responses we got from the class, was what's it like to be fill in the blank abroad. And we made reference to some of this as well in the first section about health and identity overseas. And you can think about any number of different ways that you present in the world. And again, fill in that blank. What's it like being a first generation student overseas? there are a lot of really good resources out there. And I think the main thing to remember when you're considering answers to that question is that when we go into a new culture, the culture will not adapt for us. It's really us that has to adapt to the culture. And that's not to minimize your identities, but it's a way to say that, you know, bringing the concepts of health and safety into the world with you are going to be different. And it's just a matter of finding strategies that suit you best. And so, again, here's just one example of a resource that we link to from our site on preparing for a healthy experience overseas. And that's what's it like to be a solo female traveler abroad. For some of you, picking certain model programs, you might be the only student from America on that program. You might be the only Smithy on that program. You might be finding yourselves in novel situations. And so grappling with that, thinking about what it's going to be like grappling with that in advance is really useful. And we have really good resources on the site for all of these different categories as well. So. The other thing that came up pretty consistently in the survey responses was, what are we going to be thinking about when it comes to COVID for programs overseas? And this question came up in last week's session too, but from the college's perspective, everything's operating in sort of like an endemic planning, with considering like, what does it mean now for all of our centers overseas to indeed follow testing requirements? And from our perspective, the best thing that you can do is to go ahead and head over to your program website for specific answers to questions about, can I travel independently when I'm on my program overseas? What are testing requirements and masking requirements like? And those things will also become clear as you get closer to departure. Things will have changed. They'll run pre-departure orientations, as will we, and that information will become clearer. But the other thing that we're trying to do is present a blend of the on-campus requirements and experience here. As those stipulations change, we're also making different recommendations to our students who are overseas, and with conditions on the ground. And the local laws that are, again, constantly changing. And it's really small on the screen, but you can tell that with Italy being a very small example, there's a lot of different factors going into like the aging population and just the differences in mask wearing across regions in the country that could lead to different recommendations for your program when it comes to COVID policies specifically.
I just want to add to that too, Lisa Johnson from the Study Abroad Office, is that we're monitoring the situation in all of the study abroad destinations. And one of the things we're monitoring is the student experience, right? So I think we've mentioned this in the past, you know, Smith really would prefer not to send students abroad if all they're going to be is on lockdown in their bedroom. That's kind of not what we're looking for. There may be instances where the program may need to pivot to remote teaching and learning for a short period of time, but ideally, you know, we're trying to make it, or send students to locations where you can have as much of an in-person experience as possible. So just know that that's one of the things that we're considering as a lot.
Yeah, and there's also something to be said too for the fact that we have resources to draw on in the five college consortium as well. So there are different things associated with risk that we have the strength of numbers basically from from that side as well, and using those structures. So the other topic, and I think that this is something that's going to spark a lot of really good thinking today. It might not necessarily lead to exact questions, but it will open a new area of considering preparing for health and safety on your program overseas, and that's accommodations. So what I'm giving out now is the Health and Disability Management Plan, which is a tool that you'll find in the post-acceptance stage when you start your application to study abroad. That really starts to dig into, okay, what are my requirements? What are my prescriptions that I receive? What are the services that I get from campus here? And how do those what are my plans to fit those accommodations into my experience overseas? As best as we can in our office, we try to be proactive about getting involved in that conversation with you and surfacing those thoughts for you. And also, as best as we can, we're identifying in the list of approved programs and asking you to identify, if you're petitioning for a non-approved program, whether the services that you receive for your health and disability services on campus are going to be presented. And so by default, approved programs on the Smith list are going to have those accommodations built in. The manner of delivery might differ depending on the location, again, based on just the local culture and infrastructure there, but they will have those options. And so I think that the health and disability plan that's in front of you, that management plan, it's a super useful exercise to think about, again, just everything that could impact your experience overseas in a way that helps you be proactive and, to the degree that's possible, remove unwanted surprises. So you'll find this online on our on your site's application, and you can also kind of start to have those conversations with yourself or with those who are important to you now. And as I mentioned, for students who are in like the confirmation process right now for spring 2022, we're thinking with them about pointing them in the right resources. So they may have mentioned wanting to get a certain prescription when they're overseas, or continuing mental health services remotely. And so we're just kind of bringing those up in ways that points them in the direction of, like, we have, for example, like Travel Guard and AIG, which is again a 5-college consortium resource and a policy that allows you to call and understand, is my medication available in my location that I'm studying abroad, and at what dosage, because sometimes it's different. And is it classified differently? So will I need appointments on a different schedule? And it's a really great resource. So, that's health and disability management kind of in a nutshell. Lisa, is there anything you wanted to add here?
No, I think you covered it. Again, the idea is to start having conversations earlier. So the more leeway that Angela and I can have in helping you determine, that any of your needs would be met abroad, the better, because that will give us a lot of time. And some students don't have anything, and that's fine. Don't worry about it. Some students say, oh no, I answer no to all these questions. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. But if you're answering yes to any of the questions, know that 1, you can study abroad, it's fine. And 2, there's support out there to make sure that, everyone has a safe and healthy time abroad.
Perfect. So, like I mentioned, budget and finance is my absolute favorite topic. I was on a shoestring when I studied abroad, and chose my small state college institution for the very reason that I knew they had exchanges where it was going to be on a Smith type model, pay the homeschool fee, and the costs of your program are covered overseas. So with that being said, I wanted to talk about, because we sort of touched on homeschool fees in episode 1, way back at the beginning, maybe it was end of October, beginning of this month, in the first week. The program fees and the other incidental things that come up with covering all of the costs of study abroad are sometimes an untouched on topic. And so what I'm sharing now is a budgeting worksheet that will help you really dig in. So if you've already started doing research about program types and they don't have a resource on their website that breaks this all out in this level of detail, it's a great idea to ask for that level of detail in advance and start planning out, how am I going to cover all of these costs? What is under homeschool fees? And that's Smith's responsibility. And what will I need to plan for myself? If you're planning for interterm or summer programs, the answer to that question is all of the line items on the budget worksheet are your responsibility. And so you want to be thinking proactively about totaling the complete cost, which is not just the program fee that you see on most websites program page, but all of the other pieces listed here. And there's one piece in particular about budgeting and finances that's the least touched on. That's the vaguest thing on here, which is spending money, this extra travel, social activities, gifts and souvenirs. It's the last one on the study abroad budget worksheet before you get to resources. And the reason that it's the least touched on is because we don't talk about this enough, but some of us are very frugal and some of us are very extravagant, and that's okay. But the idea is that you should be planning and thinking about, are you a frugal Fernanda? I changed the the naming here, or are you an extravagant Eliza? And so some of these fit into different categories, but you can tell that based on lifestyle and based on kind of what you want to accomplish in your time overseas, you could be looking at a very different total as the same as another Smith student on the same program as you, depending on how you choose to move about. So this is just an example, and it goes kind of into a little bit more detail. It's Barcelona circa 2018, so count for inflation in there. But that budgeting worksheet too, I think is one of the best things about it, is that it leaves space for other, right? And one of my favorite stories to tell about my own plan being on a shoestring, my own plan and budgeting and finance for my program overseas was a big part of it was my flight, the cost of my flight. And I knew that I had some connections back in my high school days. So this was my junior year, and I started to reach out to folks in my hometown, just saying, how can I help? What can I get involved in? What's happening this month? I'm getting ready for my study abroad program. And it was my enrichment teacher who actually reached back out to me and said, come park cars. We're at the Arts and Crafts Festival that always happens every year in my hometown. And I parked cars for one day, and they decided as a committee to send me all of the proceeds for that day, which in my small town of, I don't know, less than 10,000 was $900 at the festival for that day. So I was going for my whole year and bought a one-way ticket to Morocco with those funds after sending one email and spending one day under the sun, admittedly, maybe with a little bit of sunstroke, but at the end, feeling very much like it was worth it. So I say in that other category, think big, and draw on all of the resources that you might have, stretching as far back as high school days. Right? And I don't know, there are tons of other strategies. Do you want to chime in with budgeting, finance ideas?
Strategies, yeah, being creative is a good suggestion for sure. The other thing I think is helpful about the budget worksheet is it also gives you a timeline as to when you need certain things, right? So as Angela was talking about, how do you get your flight? Well, you might need money for your flight sooner than the money that you need for your personal spending expenses, right? Or your local transportation, you're actually not going to need that until you're in the country. So starting now early and, you know, pacing yourself in terms of how are you saving money or fundraising money, this stuff can be helpful with that budget worksheet. And what you need sooner rather than your recent fees are really often a surprising expense that students are necessarily planning for, and they can in some instances be in the hundreds of dollars. So I think, you know, trying to identify that for yourself early on will be helpful, and then like I said, the timelines and stuff. Yeah, strategies, big sales are popular and stuff. So
Yeah, so there's a deep needed column for each of the programs that you're considering. And they may all have very different dates as well. So,
I know, sorry, I know another thing to add to this too, as you're shopping for your study abroad programs, be looking for programs that offer more bang for the buck. For example, there's programs that have excursions built in, right? And therefore you don't necessarily need to spend that as much of your own personal money traveling around to the different locations in the country or to neighboring countries, depending on where you are. Look for programs that perhaps have some sort of reimbursement process for cultural events. So say you want to go and go to a soccer match or a sporting event. Does your program reimburse you for that so that you don't have to use your own money, or you want to go see a concert or a play or something of that nature? So look for programs. My recommendation, because I choose study abroad on a shoestring, not even a full shoestring, I would say, it was a program. You know, look for programs that are going to give you much more as part of the program, so that you don't have to fund so much of your spending.
yeah, that's great. Actually, I learned that here in the last month about our Paris program and the reimbursement process for partaking in cultural activities. You know, so that's a really good tip as well when you're considering all of the different options. So, in a very brief recap, we covered the process of thinking about your health and safety and wellness in broad terms overseas. And I would point you back to, again, the Before You Go page on our website. And it's, I want to leave off with that. Again, that QR code there in the middle about all of the different ways in which you could want to prepare for your experience abroad. We talked about the budgeting process. And we also touched briefly on COVID policies, but the main thing that we wanted to really give you the space to do this week was think about those intricate details of planning to go overseas. And since you're here and it's week 3 of a series of 3 info sessions, you probably have some, and we have a smaller crowd, you probably have some maybe unique questions, or you've been thinking through the process and you've totally changed your mind about the options that you are thinking. So cabinet and we all thought too, if folks wanted to, we could use the rest of our time here today as like an extended Q&A session as well. So we're here for that if you like. And otherwise, I would say that you're now pretty well informed And they're still advising that could come from now on, but you're pretty well informed on the study abroad process. So
I want to put a plug in for the program evaluations as well that we have at the Golden City Center to come and spend some time with them. We have them by program and by major. We ask the students who studied abroad anything from academics to what they did on their free time to how much of their own money did they spend to academic support, what classes they took. So if you're looking like, oh, I think I want to go to the University of Edinburgh, but I have no idea what kind of classes I can take. Well, you can look at the program evaluations to get some ideas of what students are taking. So use that as another resource because I think it's a really good way to get students' perspective of the study abroad experience. And also, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. If you submitted feedback to the questionnaire in terms of what you wanted these sessions to look like, thank you for that. We did our best to cover all the points in a way that makes sense. Admittedly, there were some suggestions that we didn't quite understand, so we kind of had to guess at what that was, what the student was wanting to know about. And then, as Angela mentioned, there were some pretty specific questions that were submitted that we thought perhaps because they were so specific didn't necessarily belong in a larger presentation like this. But as Angela mentioned, we can use this time right now to answer some of those more detailed questions for you if you want to get this on. And I would just say too, and if there's anything that you feel you'd like to know that we haven't covered, let us know too. Definitely fill in the blanks there. And what about this?
that's right, for sure. I mean, we're here for that. And we're here for, if there are things from the first session or last week as well that you're like, I didn't quite get what I was looking for out of it. We can always dive a little deeper. Yeah, that's not for the mic.
So hopefully you all are feeling prepared, well enough prepared to submit study abroad, at least study abroad approval applications by February. That you know that you also need to be applying for acceptance to your study abroad programs by those program deadlines. I mean, ultimately that's the goal, is to make sure that you're feeling prepared enough to take the next steps in the study abroad process. Thank you very much. I don't need to sit here unless you want to. But it's also as a semester, that semester, close to Thanksgiving. Thank you.